Good morning or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. A big virtual welcome to the Marron Institute of Urban Management at New York University. I'm Angela Hawken, the director of the Marron Institute, and we're delighted that so many of you, and I can see the clicker, it really is many of you, have taken this time to attend a webinar focused on our urban expansion program that's led by Dr. Shlomo Angel. For those of you who are not familiar with the Marron Institute, we're different from a traditional academic department. We're a provostial institute that operates as a think-do tank. And our mandate is impact, so that the doing part of our think-do tank is especially important. So at the Marron Institute, we invest in academics who are interested in applied on-the-ground research, working with practitioners and the public they serve to test new ideas and new approaches that are scalable and have the potential to dramatically improve the quality of life for people in cities across the globe. So if you're interested in our work at the Marron Institute, please subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media so that we can keep you informed of what we're up to. During the session today, we're going to learn about a project of Dr. Angel's urban expansion team. This work in Ethiopia really epitomizes what we want from Marron Institute programming. It's boots on the ground work around a simple and elegant idea that has the potential to transform how cities grow across the globe. So thank you, Dr. Angel, and to your team, and to your colleagues in Ethiopia. We say a big hello to them especially. You really have put together an impressive panel today. So thank you to our panelists as well, and to all of our attendees for joining us. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Angel, who will introduce our session today. Thank you, Soli.
Good morning and afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Angela, for your kind introduction. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, my good friend and colleague, Paul Romer, let me say a few words about the history of the key idea behind the Ethiopia Urban Expansion Initiative. For most of my professional career, my long professional career, I may say, I worked on the housing problem, trying to figure out how to help people house themselves. I realized early on that people could build their own houses if they had access to a plot of land, preferably one with basic services and good access to jobs. I later realized the government was too slow in providing people with service plots, while land markets, both formal and informal, were doing it at scale. I then understood that the role of government is to make room on the urban periphery, a lot of room for land to remain affordable for everyone to house themselves. For that, governments need only supply a grid of arterial roads with trunk infrastructure, leaving the subdivision and servicing of residential plots to intermediaries. To convince myself, and more importantly, to convince mayors that cities needed a lot of room to expand, we only had to study a sample of cities the world over to see that many cities were doubling their population and tripling their area in 20 to 30 years' time. This is how the Atlas of Urban Expansion came to be, and that is how the two most successful urban expansion initiatives, the one in Ethiopia and the one in Colombia, came about. And this is how Paul Romer came into the picture. Paul, as our director, made $1 million available to us to fund the Ethiopia and Colombia initiatives, $500,000 each. That was how they happened. And to confess, I've been looking for other Paul Romers to fund more urban expansion initiatives ever since. And believe me, they are very hard to find. I'm beginning to think that there's only one Paul Romer. Here he is, our keynote speaker. A few words of introduction for those who do not know him. Paul is an economist and a co-recipient of the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences in 2018 for his contributions to endogenous growth theory. He was awarded the prize for integrating technological innovations into long-run macroeconomic analysis. His recent work is focused on urbanization, on how cities can generate prosperity by encouraging innovation and knowledge sharing. Paul is the founder of the NYU Stern Urbanization Project and the founding director of the NYU Marron Institute of Urban Management. I would like to add that Paul recruited me to work with him at NYU. It started with, let's meet at a coffee shop once a week to talk about cities. Then it was, what would you like to do if you came to work with me at NYU? I would like to help rapidly growing cities make room for their orderly expansion, I responded. Good, he said, write it into your job description. That was in 2012, and we've been having fun running ideas past each other at great speed ever since. And so here we are. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sally. It's really a huge pleasure for me to have been part of this project and to be part of this event celebrating what this project has accomplished for the people it's touched, but also the demonstration value it has as a sign of what else many people could do. I want to talk a little bit about the work that went into getting ready to help someone like Sally do what he did, because I want to describe how much effort it takes by many people. And I also want to be very clear about why it's so worthwhile to make those kinds of efforts. So back in 2008, I decided to focus on urbanization as the way to drive economic development around the world. I started looking for a university that would be willing to bet on a new type of institute, because I was really committed to this idea of boots on the ground and impact that Angela described. Solly came up with the best description of that approach that anyone has ever proposed. He said that in our work on urbanization, we were not going to produce reports, we were not going to produce papers, none of those were our measures of outputs. We wanted to produce stakes in the ground. And in a vague sense, I knew back in 2008 that that was what I wanted to do, to have that kind of impact. Now, the great thing about cities is that you can meet people and learn from them. And when I got to New York, I met two of the most important people in the world in thinking about urban development, Alain Berthaud and Shlomo Angel. One of our early bets at Marron was, or even Urbanization Project before it became Marron, was on Alain's book, which has been a huge success, but the other was on Solly. And as he describes, he had a vision for what he could go out and do. We had the resources because of Don, and we said, do it. Now, I have to describe one of my early encounters with Solly, though, to explain this kind of our working relationship. At one point early on, and I didn't know nearly enough. I mean, I knew I didn't know enough about this area, but I said something to Solly about, could we use manufactured housing as a way to reduce the cost of housing and make it more affordable? And Solly, I can remember, I don't know if you remember this, Solly, but Solly got very close to me and his face got a little bit red. And he said, Paul, poor people have been making their own houses for centuries. Poor people make their own houses everywhere in the world. You don't need to give them a house. You just need to give them a place where they can build their own house. My reaction as Solly was telling that is, oh, he's right. But I loved the passion and the commitment to an idea that he knew to be true. And he was committed to the truth because he wasn't trying to score points or get citations. He wanted to make things happen. And you can't make things happen based on a theory of action that's false. So I think that conversation persuaded me, I gotta find a way to work with Solly, because it's that passion and that commitment to truth that is so rare and so important. And so because of his passion, his commitment, and the resources we were able to muster, he was able to do what we did in Colombia and in Ethiopia. And one of the great joys I had was visiting both of those countries and talking to the local officials, seeing what we'd been able to help them do, or like really just empower them to do what they knew how to do. this touched real lives, like the lives you'll see in the video of the women describing what it meant for them to be able to get a job. Now, to finish out the story, in 2016, I went to the World Bank, partly because, as Sully described, we were really having difficulty finding ongoing finance to do the kind of work that we saw could be so powerful. And I hoped I could mobilize some resources at the bank to do this. More generally, get the bank focused on urbanization as the lever for spurring economic development. And unfortunately, that bet just didn't pay off. I got close to persuading the president to consider an entirely new city at one point, but as they say, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. And I didn't close the deal. So I came back somewhat disappointed to NYU in 2018. So why is it worth striving so hard to build these rare opportunities like what we did at the Marron Institute? It's partly because we can touch the lives of these young women you'll see in the video. And we can touch the lives of the government officials you'll see, where we help them persuade others to give them the ability to do something new and potentially important. But it also can touch the lives of people working in academics, working in institutions like the World Bank. That there's something just profoundly satisfying about having a purpose, finding meaning in what you do, and being committed to something that's bigger than oneself. So for all of those reasons, I hope the world will pay attention to the remarkable accomplishments described in this video. And by the way, pay attention as well to the work that Angela is doing in prisons, changing lives there, and in many other comparable settings with this same kind of work on the ground, the stakes in the ground that matter. The Marron Institute continues to do that kind of work. And I can just tell you that if you want to commit to be a part of this work as an academic, as a former policy type, you will never experience the kind of satisfaction, you'll experience the kind of satisfaction in this effort that you will never get anywhere else in any other job you can do. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Romer, for that excellent keynote. And I agree with you completely. I think the satisfaction that you get from doing this kind of work on the ground is unmatched in any other forum, no matter what kind of like accolades or praise you might get. I'm Patrick Lamson-Hall. I'm a research scholar at NYU Marron, and it's also been my pleasure to be the New York-based coordinator of the Ethiopia Urban Expansion Initiative. The Urban Expansion Initiative was the first project that I worked on with Dr. Angel, and the first day in my professional career was actually spent in Addis Ababa at the launching workshop for this project. Over the past 7 years, my Ethiopian counterpart, Sigaretta Tefessa, and I have worked to support a number of Ethiopian cities in planning for their inevitable urban expansion, and also recognizing that this is a rare initiative, a unique opportunity to get to try an innovative idea like this. We have tried very hard to document their progress, including their challenges and their struggles, as they've implemented this new and much simpler planning methodology that Dr. Angel has developed. The film that we're going to show you today is the result of that effort. And the effort here is not only our effort, but it's also the effort of the city officials in Owassa, Adama, Bahir Dar, and Mekelle, who believed in this program and who actually designed and built the arterial roads. The government officials in the ministries in Ethiopia at the regional and federal level, who are willing to commit resources and attention to something that was both speculative and unlikely to be completed within their lifetimes. This is a rare characteristic in public servants. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Blue Nile Film and Television, who over the course of the last 7 years have provided us with 4 different film crews and edited the footage together to its final form, including the soundtrack and narration. I'd also like to say the name of a critical co-collaborator on this initiative, Dr. David de Groot, who worked for years on World Bank projects in Ethiopia, building the relationships that made our path in Ethiopia such a smooth one. Also, Mr. Richard Martin, a talented urban planner who handled much of the work on the ground in the early years. Finally, I'd like to thank the Cities Alliance, who supported us in extending the work from the initial group of 4 cities to an additional 14 cities. And in this, they showed true vision in advocating for urban expansion as a strategy that can be applied in many places around the world. The film will be followed by a panel discussion, and audience members will also be able to submit questions, which I will moderate, then passing along to Dr. Angel, who will run the panel. So please write your questions down as they occur to you. In case it's not really obvious, this work is very dear to me, and I am proud and happy to show you what it means for the people of Ethiopia to make room for urban expansion. So I hope you enjoy it.
68% of the world population is expected to live in urban areas by 2050. 1/3 of the growth in urban population between now and 2050 will take place in sub-Saharan Africa. According to a Nobel Prize winner economist, Dr. Paul Romer, early interventions to harness urbanization boosts economic growth for African cities.
Almost all of the economic activity, set aside a few cases like minerals extraction and agriculture, all of the other activity will take place in cities. And what's crucial now is to make sure that everybody is included in the possibility of that kind of activity. And what this requires is orderly urban expansion. Without that public space, a dense urban area won't generate the productivity and the improvements in the quality of life that the best cities can offer.
In Ethiopia, the urban population is going to quadruple by 2050. In 2013, New York University NYU introduced and supported the Ethiopian Urban Expansion Program to enable the Ethiopian government to get ahead of the rapid urbanization curve.
The Ethiopia Urban Expansion Initiative was initially a program to help 4 regional capitals, rapidly growing cities of intermediate size, to prepare for their expansion. Ethiopia is one of the least urbanized countries in the world. It's only 17% of the population lives in urban areas, and they are urbanizing very rapidly. In most cities, expansion is taking place much faster than the public sector can respond to it. So what we need to do is, instead of playing catch-up, coming after development has taken place and providing it with services, we need to move ahead of the curve and prepare areas for expansion before the development gets there. And that is where it has enormous value, because putting an arterial road in the rural area before development gets there costs very little in comparison with what it costs to put an arterial road through a settled neighborhood.
An urban expansion plan is a simpler kind of plan. It involves forecasting 30 years of population growth, estimating how much land the cities are going to consume over that period, and then making a simple plan to ensure that that land is accessible for urban development. The key to developing an expansion plan is first to accurately gauge the amount of land that will be needed for development using historical demand for land as a forecasting tool, and then to secure the rights of ways for these arterial roads before development happens for the entire expansion area. So in other words, what we're asking municipalities to do is to secure the land for 30 years of arterial roads today, over the course of the next 5 years. It's not enough to just mark the roads on the map. You have to actually pay compensation for the roads in order to guarantee that no construction will take place in the right-of-way.
The most important thing that NYU does when it goes to a city and tries to explain this process for urban expansion, for successful urban expansion, the most important thing we do is tell the people there that they already know how to do this. They know how to survey a road. Every local government around the world knows how to survey the roads. They know how to put stakes in the ground. What they need is the confidence to take what they already know and to just do it in advance of the demand. They just need a little bit of time to do something which is addressing the problems that will come in the future, rather than reacting after the fact, after it's a problem that's so hard to solve.
Part of the role of NYU was to bring this methodology and establish it as a valid mechanism of planning. We then wanted to support the municipalities in designing the grids and making the plans. And much of that support consisted of simple technical advising. We then advised them on the development of a self-financing land development and infrastructure implementation system, so that as these grids were being developed, they would raise revenues for the municipalities and increase their capacity to provide service to urban land. One other important contribution of NYU was to support the municipalities and the regional governments in expanding the planning jurisdictions of the cities. For plans that were this successful and this ambitious, the support provided by NYU was actually quite minimal. And the reason why this is possible is because this is a process that really became owned by the municipalities.
ሂደቱ እንግዲህ ከመጀመሪያው የኤክስፓንሽን ፕላን ስንሰራ ይሄን ከሚያስተባብረው ከፌደራል ሚኒስቴር መስሪያ ቤቱ ጋር በጋራ በመሆን የሰራ ነው። እንደተባለው ሌላ ባለሙያ ሳያስፈልገን፣ ሌላ ኮንትራክቹዋል አግሪመንት ሳያስፈልገን በእኛ ሙያተኞች፣ በእኛ ፕላነሮች፣ በእኛ የቅየሳ ባለሙያዎች፣ በእኛ የጂአይኤስ ባለሙያዎች የተሰራ ነው።
የአርባን ኤክስፓንሽኑን ከሬጉላራይዜሽን ጋር አገናኝተን ነው እየሰራን ያለነውና አርሶ አደሩ ሳይፈናቀል በቦታው ያለ እዛው ሬጉሌት እየተደረገበት ሁኔታ ነው ያለው። ምናልባት በመንገዱ ምክንያት ቤት ወይም ቋሚ ንብረት የሚነካ ከሆነ ቤት የሚነካ ከሆነ ሌላ ቦታ ምትክ ቦታ እየሰጠን ያለንበትና ምናልባት ቋሚ ግንባታዎች ካሉ ካሳ የሚከፈል ግንባታዎች ካሉ ፌር በሆነ መልኩ መልሶ ማቋቋም በሚሆን መልኩ ካሳ የሚከፈለውና ከተማ አስተዳደሩ ራሱ ነው የሚከፍለው።
መንገድ ቢሰፋ ቢሰራ ለኛ በጣም እንትንልናል፣ በጣም ደስታ ነው። አሁን በዚህ ሰዓት ማለት አሁን ከረምተውና መንገድ ከተበላሸ ሞተሩን ራሱ እዛ ቆመ አንዳንዴ በእግር እመጣለሁ። ግን መንገድ ቢሰራ በአንድ 4-5 ደቂቃ መንገድ ነውና መንገድ ቢሰራ ቆንጆ ነው ይላሉ። ለካሳ ክፍያ ሊኖር ይችላል ላኖርም ይችላል። ለካሳ ሳይሆን ዋና እኛ መንገድ ማግኘት ነው የምንፈልገው። ዋና መንገድ ነው።
The planning approach adopted by NYU Urban Expansion Program is very different from the conventional planning systems that Ethiopian cities and many cities across the world have been using.
Our model for planning for urban expansion is completely different than the traditional model, which is to hire some consulting firm from the north to do a master plan for the city that is then just discarded or put on a shelf to collect dust. Our idea is coming at it in a much simpler way by creating the local capacity to plan and making the plan very simple.
So the key is to start with just a little bit of planning, and a kind of planning that leaves you the flexibility, that gives you options later on to do the things that might or might not turn out to be useful.
After a few years of implementation, there is now sufficient evidence to infer that NYU's model of managing urban expansion is a simple and proven approach to ensure orderly and economically viable urbanization.
We entered Ethiopia, started to talk with mayors, started to explain what the possibilities were, what they could do to make their cities more vibrant, more inclusive, better places for workers and firms, better places for families to live. And some of the officials in these cities took these ideas and ran with them, took advantage of them. So we're seeing powerful stages of development, big leaps in development. The successes in those cities are copied by other cities, other local officials who want to know, how can we do this too?
የአርባን ኤክስፓንሽን ጥቅም ለአሳ ያመጣው በጣም ብዙ ነው። ለምሳሌ ከተማው እያደገ ያለ ከተማ እንደመሆኑ መጠን ከተማው መስፋቱ ወደ ጎን የማይቀር ስለሆነ በጊዜ ይሄ አርባን ኤክስፓንሽን ፕላን ባይሰራ ኖሮ በአሁኑ ጊዜ ምንድነው የሚፈጠረው? እዛ ጋር ህገወጥ ወይም ኢንፎርማል ሴትልመንት ስኳተር ኤሪያ ነበር የሚሆነው። ኢን አድቫንስ ለአርባን ኤክስፓንሽን መለየቱና በዛ መሰረት ደግሞ ወደ ስራ መገባቱ አሁን ሐዋሳ ከተማ ያላት በፕላን እንድትመራ አሁን ያላት ገጽታ እንዲኖር ትልቅ አስተዋጽኦ አድርጓል። ሳይለሙ የነበሩት አካባቢዎች እንዲለሙ በፕላን ጋይድ መደረጉ የከተማ ረቨኑ እንዲጨምር አድርጓልና ይሄ ለከተማው እድገት ትልቅ አስተዋጽኦ አድርጓል።
ከተማ መስፋፊያ ፕላን ወይም እቅድ በከተማችን ቀደም ብለን እንድናቀድ ቀደም ብለን ማቀድ ሲባል ደግሞ በተለይ መንገድን በመክፈት መንገድን ከመክፈት ጋር ተያይዞ ደግሞ በቂ የሆነ መሬት ለተለያየ አገልግሎት እንድናቀርብ ረድቶናል። ለምሳሌ የምታዩት የኢንዱስትሪ ዞን ግራና ቀኝ የምታዩት መንገዱ በመከፈቱና በእያንዳንዱ ቦታ ላይ ደግሞ የተዘጋጀ የብሎክ ሲስተም መኖሩ ለከተማ አስተዳደሩ ጠቀሜታ አለው።
Urban expansion has also created opportunities for local entrepreneurs in Ethiopia to expand their factories. With more land for development, businesses can grow and create jobs for people migrating from rural areas.
በመካከለኛ ደረጃ ያሉ ኢንዱስትሪዎች የኢንዱስትሪ ቦታ መመቻቸቱ with their capacity እንዲሰሩ ድሩን ይፈጥራል። የከተማ አስተዳደሩ በዚህ በኩል ለኢንዱስትሪ የሚያደርገው ግዛ ከፍተኛ ሚና ነው ያለው። ምክንያቱም በአሁኑ ሰዓት ከተማዋ ካላት የመስፋፋት አንፃር ለኢንዱስትሪው ትኩረት ተሰጥቶ ለዚህ የሚሆን ቦታ ኢንፍራስትራክቸር አንዳንድ መሰረታዊ ነገሮችን አሟልቶ ለዚህ የተዘጋጀ ቦታ እንዲኖር ማድረጉ ትልቅ አስተዋጽኦ ነው ያለው።
የአብስራ ሲሳይ ይባላል። የመጣው ወርቀምላ ነው። ወደ ስራ ቦታ ሳልመጣ ተማሪ ነበር። 12ኛ ክፍል ተማሪ ነኝ። በአጋጣሚ ውጤት ሲቀር ስራ ጀመርኩ። ከመሸንቲ እንኳን ቢያንስ ምን መጣው 700 ምናምን እንሆናለን ሴትም ወንድም ሆነ ማለት ነው። ግንባታ ስራ ከጀመርኩ ወር ከ3 ሳምንት ሆነኛል። የሆነ ጉዳት ያመጣም ብያል አስብም። ይለኛ እየተስፋፋ እየሄደ በሩቅ ቦታ ሄደ መማር ይቀርና ከዚህ ኢንዱስትሪው በየሰፋበት ሰዓት ለኛ ከቅርብ ቀርተን ትራንስፖርት አይሻ ምን አይሻ ከዚህው እንቀራለን። ጥሩ ነው ጠቃሚ ነው ብዬ ነው ወስደው እንደኔ።
There is lots of conventional wisdom that's just plain wrong. All over the developing world, people think you can't have urbanization without slums. And China shows that's not true. Another bit of conventional wisdom right now is that there's no possibility for manufacturing in Africa. Ethiopia, especially in Hawassa, is showing that's not true either. If you make room for factories, you make room for workers to come get jobs in factories, you can get tens of thousands of new jobs.
የስራ ዕድል ፈጠራ ላይ በብዙ ዳይሬክሽን ማየት ይቻላል። ሐዋሳ ኢንዱስትሪ ፓርክ አንዱ አብነት ነው። ሐዋሳ ኢንዱስትሪ ፓርክ በአሁኑ ጊዜ 26000 በላይ ሰራተኞች አሉ። አብዛኞቻቸው 85% በላይ ሴቶች ናቸው።
ዳማው ኢንዱስትሪያል ፓርክ ተሎሰቴዲ ሎሴማቲ አረኒት ባሾ ኢንዱስትሪያል ፓርክ ፋናንቶክ ወሮ ሎሶ ያኒ ከበሰረ ዳማና ኢሰደ ፋናንቱ ገደንሳኒ ሎሶ ሲራዳ ታጋና ኖማያ ነራ ወያ ቦሳ ገለዲ ተማ ወያ ቦሻ ምሰዱ ድሬማና ጣ ወያ ቦ ቲሸርት ካያደ ወያ ቦሳ ገለዲ ተማ
The work that NYU has done in Ethiopia is really one of the best demonstrations of how a little bit of planning can yield huge benefits, can lay the foundation for successful urban development. So Ethiopia could be the local leader in Africa, showing everybody it's possible to have successful urbanization, it's possible to lay the framework for much higher levels of productivity and income in the future, and it's possible to do this using the time-tested strategies of inviting in manufacturing and giving people their first formal sector job in a manufacturing firm.
Thanks everyone for your attention during the film. Now I'm going to hand over to Dr. Angel, and we will shift into the panel.
We have a distinguished panel here of 5 members, which I would like to introduce one by one. Ato Abuye Aneley is the head of Policy Research and Advisory Bureau in the Ministry of Urban Development and Construction of the Government of Ethiopia. He has been working in urban development, housing, and construction since September of 1986. He served as chief advisor to the minister from October 2012 until February 2019. His main tasks were to coordinate the design, review, and implementation of policies and strategies in urban and construction sector. Ato focused on providing strategic and result-oriented advice to ensure that the actions taken were consistent with the ministry's mandates, program objectives, and long-term goals. He's also assisting the minister in nurturing development partnership with multilateral and bilateral organizations. His research interests are local and regional planning, urban land administration, housing, and good governance. My good friend Julian Baskin works at Cities Alliance Secretariat in Brussels as their principal urban advisor. He's a town and regional planner with over 30 years of experience in urban programming. Julian focuses on urban governance, participatory planning, slum upgrading, and affordable housing. Prior to joining Cities Alliance in 2009, he served as the director of the Alexandra Renewal Program, an urban redevelopment initiative involving some 400,000 inhabitants in Gauteng province in South Africa. He has also worked for CARE International, UN Habitat in the cities of Durban and Johannesburg, and has lived and worked on slum upgrading in Mozambique, Bangladesh, and Angola. Nicolás Galarza Sanchez is the Director of Urban Space and Territorial Development in the Ministry of Housing, Cities, and Territory of the Government of Colombia. Before joining the ministry in 2018, Nicolas was the coordinator of the Colombia Urban Expansion Initiative at the Marron Institute at NYU. He also played an important role in the making of the Atlas of Urban Expansion, creating a comprehensive list of all the cities in the world that had 100,000 people or more in the year 2000. Simple as it may sound, it took 2 years to put together. Nicolas has a master's degree in urban planning from the Wagner School of Public Service at NYU. Hussein Ibrahim Kasso has more than 20 years of work experience with the government of Ethiopia, international NGOs like Oxfam, Save the Children, ActionAid, and the Danish Church Aid, and international organizations like UNDP. He worked in different positions, ranging from program officer to program manager. At present, he's the regional program manager at the Swiss Agency for International Development and Cooperation, based in the Embassy of Switzerland in Addis Ababa, with the responsibility for regional migration activities with the African Union, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, and the Horn of Africa countries. Before joining SDC, he worked for Swedish SIDA as a program manager for migration and development in sub-Saharan Africa, working in the areas of labor migration, migration statistics, remittances, and regional refugee management projects. Ibrahim also holds a master's degree in rural development. Finally, I would like to introduce my old acquaintance, Victor Vergara, who has 30 years of experience in the urban sector and currently the senior evaluator for urban land and resilience in the World Bank's independent evaluation group. Victor currently co-manages evaluations in 3 areas: urban resilience, managing urban spatial growth, and solid waste management. Victor has worked for many years in the World Bank Institute, where he led global capacity building programs on urban development and municipal finance, focusing on sustainable finance and land use in both Africa and Latin America. As an urban practice leader for East Asia and the Pacific region of the World Bank, he led urban lending operations as well as the quality assurance of the operational and analytical portfolio of the bank. Victor holds 2 master's degrees, one in city planning from MIT and one in agriculture from Texas A&M. That completes my long introduction of the panelists. And now I would like to ask each one of the panelists to make a few comments before we open the session for discussion and questions. Thank you.
Thank you for creating this platform for the ministry. On behalf of the Ministry of Urban Development and Construction, I would like to thank you and acknowledge the support received from NYU through this very important urban expansion initiatives. I think the ministry, when it was agreed with the NYU, and as we go along, we acknowledge at least 3 or 4 important results from this initiative. Actually, you know, the planning approach is very simple. Of course, that is one of the important one. And the other one is it enables municipality to plan in advance for the future development. That is, you know, there is a big pressure of high demand for land. It's not only for housing, for industrial development, because it's now an urbanization is Ethiopian need to develop more faster in many aspects of the way we have the agricultural development, industrialization, and we need to shift to industrial development through the engagement of more micro, small, and medium enterprise in a way to get land and flourish in the, of course, not only in the expansion area, of course, looking also inward. This initiative has enabled municipalities to get more land and to look into how these new initiatives can be really accommodated in the new expansion areas. And the other one is create local enterprise to extend their business in many cases, because many of the small and medium enterprises have come, in fact, in the industrial park, that's a government initiative basically, but many of this demand can be addressed through the new expansion area. That's also, the other issue is, you know, with a little bit planning process, it's enabling creating a big impact in getting more managing expansion somehow. And the other very important issue is using and improving local knowledge. In many cases, you know, engaging more local people in the process is very important. I think that is critical, basically, and we acknowledge that issue. And maybe in some cases, maybe I know we have been together down to the local level, and we see more of enthusiasm and very aspiration. But in my point of view, that we always, you know, discuss with Patrick and many of the NYU staffs, how can we really integrate this new initiative with the hinterland development? Because, you know, there are big question of land use. Now, expansion is not very easy. It is really a very challenging process, because there is a trade-off between agricultural development and city development. Always in the peri-urban area, there is always conflict of land use, conflict of making use of land, of course, from the government side also, how to use the land more in looking into from its suitability analysis and getting really land use process, how to get the expansion, which direction can the expansion take place. That are the very critical issues, integrating. And the other issue is the issue of compensation. We in the ministry, Ethiopia has approved the urban regeneration and expansion strategy in June 2018. And following this strategy, we have also have a proclamation to determine the expropriation of land and paying compensation. Not only compensation, we have to change the livelihood of the people living in the rural hinterland. That is not really a question of paying compensation. Changing the livelihood of people living in the hinterland, in the expansion area, has to be already addressed. Because it is really a very critical and highly contentious issue in a way to get really expansion to happen. So these are the additions that we want to see. And actually, with that understanding, how to really manage expansion and how to get really people really accommodated in such expansion process is very critical, because the simplicity is good. Sometimes, you know, we cannot be more extremely simple, so that things are not simple in the expansion area. And looking inward, and at the same time, expansion is, we cannot avoid it because it's obvious people are coming to the city. For me, you know, the three factors that urbanization, our urbanization process is very fast, very fast. Of course, least urbanized, Ethiopia is very strange, you know. Ethiopia is least urbanized, 22% urbanized, but 5.4% urbanization rate. This is really strange because, you know, among this new urban population increase, shift of population, about 46% are rural-urban migration. So this feature has to be addressed in such a way that how to get service land for these people, job for these people. And many of these things are really very challenging. So expansion is obvious, but managing expansion has to be really to work out more in addition to what we have already achieved. So we acknowledge that we need, having said this, we need to really work together in more cities for the future. I hope with NYU and get try to get accommodate all these things. Thank you very much for the whole support.
Thank you for your comments, Abuye. Let's continue, and now would like to ask Hussein Ibrahim Kasso to comment.
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator, and good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for having me on this platform. As I've been introduced by Dr. Angel already, I'm Ibrahim Kasso, working for the Cities Development Corporation in Addis Ababa, and working in partnership, of course, with the City Alliance on Urban and Migration in the Global South. So really, I would like to congratulate the project, which has been coming with this innovative idea of expanding and how cities should expand in the context of Ethiopia. I myself, as an Ethiopian, do understand how the city expansion is informal and the challenges on the different cities and the mayors. I do understand very well as a city resident and some of the examples given. More or less, I think from the films that we have shown, how the project has been come to across and supporting the different socio-economic challenge of the cities in terms of access to land, housing, and also infrastructure like roads and others. The model is, I think, it is a work on progress, which I saw. It's a work on progress. It has been gaining momentum and learning from the entire process and adjusting itself to the new demand. Coming to the focus of the point I should be making with respect to rural-urban migration, which my colleague from the ministry, Ato Abuye, has mentioned, really, maybe in the film, it is not that much explained that how these rural urbans has been integrated into the cities, because it has been said 46%, very large amount of the labor supply is coming from the rural areas, especially during this the industrial park development, city infrastructure, big construction work, and others. So how the cities are ready really to forecast the labor supply from the rural areas, which is very large amount. So our cities do not have sufficient data on the labor movement or labor mobility to the cities. I think there are a lot of challenge in terms of having accurate data on the labor migration to the cities for different cities on the annual basis. the profile of migrant is not that much known, and the skill of migrant as well, because skilling migrant is very important. We have a large amount of female workers in the industries. How should we skill them? You know, some of them have gone to elementary school, some maybe high school. We have been mentioned, one has said complete grade 12 and then seeking for jobs. But still, completing grade 12 alone is not enough to be working in the big factories. So skilling the migrant is a big issue. And the other major point I can make is how the cities will accommodate this big labor mobility in terms of availing social service, in terms of, you know, health facilities, housing, sanitation, and a lot. Because urban or cities has to well in advance plan and know really for 10 or 12 or 15 years the kind of population grows beyond the natural growth. And probably if maybe the last remark is in terms of the labor mobility, the social protection for the labor migrant and the decent work agenda is an issue for these days, you know, so that the cities and the migrants are equally benefit from the program. So I think when that would be considered into, I think the initiative and this program will make best use of both migrant and the city residents will benefit from this initiative. And one last point I could share is in the terms of expansion, the big challenge we have is how the hinterland areas will be integrated into cities, because farmers will not alone go to cities with their house. What about their livelihood and the livelihood pattern to be part of the city? That's a big challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahim. You raised some very critical and important issues. The idea of making room and preparing land is only the beginning in the urbanization process, and there are a lot more steps. We only do that in order to make that the first step. We're not saying that this would be the last step in the urbanization process. I would like to now invite our third panelist, Nicolás Galarza Sanchez, to make his remarks.
Thank you, everyone. First, allow me to state how happy I am to be back, seeing so many familiar faces. The director Angela, of course, Professor Paul, Professor Soli, Patrick, on an institution that I spent most of the last decade working with is an honor and a pure joy for me to be joined by friends and mentors from my new position. I'm truly excited about how the case of the Ethiopian government and the Ethiopian urban expansion is already bearing so many interesting fruits. And I think, you know, a lot of ideas come to mind. So I'm just gonna try to make some general comments on the things that I would like to highlight, and maybe later on engaging on some discussion. I recall in many of the discussions that we had, and I think one of Professor Paul's keynote presentations where he was saying, you know, when we get to compare, and we know that the case of New York is one that we look up to as a good example, but maybe thinking for a lot of cities in the developing countries that, you know, we can emulate the case of New York. I recall him saying that when New York did the 1811 plan, the income per capita of New York was not much higher than that of many places, particularly on the developing world. And I think now the fact that we have so well documented a success story on Ethiopia kind of shows a way, shows a path, and it's not so far-fetched. It's not something that we can say, oh, well, New York, who's going to be able to do that? No, actually, you know, a country like Ethiopia is able to do it, and it's showing us the way. So I want to congratulate my colleagues and all the Ethiopian officials that have managed to put this thing together. It's an example, I think, for all the world, and we look up to it. Although we at the Colombia, at with the Colombian urban expansion, and now me as a public official in Colombia, we're learning and trying to emulate the case. Now, one of the things that struck me the most about the video is actually seeing that the minimal plan of trunk infrastructure is the most visible output has not to do with housing only. And as planners, we're constantly trying to solve the housing problem. And as Professor Soli and Professor Paul mentioned, you know, the issue of housing has been being solved by people for centuries. So, and I think that kind of short-sighted approach in terms of thinking, you know, we need land for housing. Housing, to an extent, kind of gets taken care of itself, but we need to provide infrastructure for the other things. And from my experience working at the Colombian government now, I see often that when we project expansion, we're only thinking about housing, and we're leaving at least 50% of the equation behind. And that is that we also need to provide land for infrastructure for jobs. And that's something incredible that I see on the Ethiopian video. The fact that to see someone coming from rural areas realizing and gaining the benefits of urban expansion, of planned, orderly urban expansion to improve their quality of life is something that I think speaks for itself. And something that also has struck me here working at the government and in general as a planner in different countries. The bulk of my work has been done in Latin America, is to see something that when it comes to us forecasting how much land is needed for expansion, there is really, as a discipline, not a unique technique. We use different methods. People try, as I was saying, to look at housing. People, in some cases, project, in the best cases, public space, the demand for public space. But something that we need to look at, and I think, again, this is a great example, is how we complete the equation. We need housing, we need residential areas, we need no residential areas, and very importantly, and of course, this is kind of the core of the concept, we need trunk infrastructure. And that is the backbone for what we're doing. And we're seeing how in Ethiopia, firms are settling, are capitalizing the infrastructure because they get to be more competitive. Now, seeing kind of as I have in parallel what has been happening in Ethiopia and in Colombia, and thinking about lessons learned, the challenges that we have seen here have to do with the continuation of political cycles. Here in Colombia, we only have 4-year terms, and there's no opposition to be re-elected. And sometimes it's hard to get the momentum of one term passed to the other one. And that's something that I think needs to be sorted out. And I think in the Ethiopian case has been done very, very successfully. Now, one thing that I want to highlight, and I have 2 more ideas and I close, is something that you can truly see, and it relates to my previous point, is the fact that you can clearly see that in Ethiopia there is political will. And as I was mentioning, the challenge when there are change of administrations is to be able to continue and to have the political will to actually implement this. And that is something that at the Marron Institute we have always tried to do, as Professor Paul and Professor Soli were mentioning, which is having stakes on the ground. And we saw it in New York over 200 years. We're seeing it now in Ethiopia. And when we have had political will in Colombia, we have seen it. There are also some examples that you're seeing in Sierra Leone with some other organizations. And political will is key. And I want to highlight that because as we're looking to emulate and to show that this is a way, political will is crucial. And I close with this remark. Recently, I was reading by recommendation of Patrick, the latest Bill Easterly's book, The Tyranny of Experts. And one thing that I saw that as a policymaker now, I have been able I have had on the back of my head for a while, is the fact that on this idea of the debates between Hayek and Murdoch, one thing that is crucial for us to accomplish or to keep in mind when we're doing policy is to understand that as policymakers, we need to be enablers of individual freedom. And I think this project, as we were seeing with this lady in Ethiopia that came from the rural area by decision, looking for a better future, looking for something for her family and for a better being for herself, is something that we've accomplished. So again, this is amazing. I'm very happy. I'm very proud of the work that you guys have done. And I'm taking note. I need to put something together. So maybe we can have something similar shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicolas, for your comments on Ethiopia. I was hoping that you were going to say something about the Colombia Urban Expansion Initiative. Let me just mention one interesting attribute of that initiative, and that has to do with stakes in the ground. In Colombia, stakes in the ground has been translated to trees in the ground. And we've been creating rows of trees along the future sidewalks of arterial roads on the periphery of two cities, Monteria and Valledupar in Colombia, to designate where the arterial roads would be 10, 20, or 30 years before they are built. So in both cities, there are nurseries with local trees that are being planted along the future sidewalks of these roads to put, as Paul was saying, stakes in the ground. I would now like to move to our fourth panelist, Julian Baskin, and ask him to comment.
We all know that African cities are growing, and the figures of cities growing by 315 million people, which is more than the population of the 20 biggest cities in the world combined. And at the same time as African cities growing, we also know that African local governments are very undercapacitated, with something like having only 28% of the skilled people they need to manage the city. Over and above that, we also know that the planning system itself has been one that has simply not been able to meet the challenge. So, for example, in 2016, when we did a study in Mozambique, we discovered that there was a national need for something like 80,000 service sites a year, and the system was only providing 5, which meant that the vast majority of people were having to find land informally. Now, what this means right across Africa is you have these two huge risks. You have the one risk that happens, whereas people settle on the least defended land, they settle on land that is environmentally very unstable and are subject to having their houses destroyed by flooding, by a whole range of environmental disasters, or they are also under the threat always of being relocated because some new road has to come or some new infrastructure has to come into the area where they are settled. So you have this constant process of people always going backwards, trying to consolidate in the city and then always going backwards. Now, so these are big risks. It's very hard to invest in a city if you never know if you're secure in where you are living. So the whole debate around urban management and how to manage urbanization in Africa was really characterized by two words. It was characterized by the word complexity and backlogs. And what I really liked when I first met Dr. Angel and Dave de Groot at the time and the general team was that they spoke a different language. They said it's not about complexity and backlogs. It's about saying, what can we do with the capacities that we have that will make the difference? And there is a way to plan that will get you in front of the curve. And this changes the debate completely. And what we find within the Cities Alliance is that if you go to a national government and you say to a national government, cities are growing and it's incredibly complex and we really don't have the tools to move forward, national governments are going to say, well, we don't want to invest in our cities because our cities will simply end up being huge slums of the future. But if you go to a national government and say, there is a way of managing your cities in a way that will enable jobs to come to the city, that will enable people to build their own houses on land that they will not be threatened in the future, because it's the land that we know will be able to be serviced because we have in place the basic services grid. Then you change the political will. People start to see there is a way forward. But from the Cities Alliance perspective, we have taken this land expansion thing. We are now incorporating it into all our country programs. We are replicating. We love the word of a think-do. We see ourselves as a think-do organization, as Angela expressed the Marron Institute as being a think-do organization. And what we're trying to do now is to see how this land expansion can also incorporate the other second huge challenge facing Africa, that of climate change. And we believe within the land expansion process, you need to both lay out the service grid, because every city has to be built on the platform of a service grid, but also lay out the land that needs to be protected so that cities have the ecosystems they need to protect them against climate change. Because right now, the least defended land are precisely those floodplains, the river banks, where people find land to settle. So from the Cities Alliance perspective, we are very grateful to have engaged with New York University. We've learned a great deal from it, and we believe that what we have here is the beginnings of an approach to planning that can be built on, and depending on the capacities, every city can have an entry point as to how they plan. If you have very little capacity, there are still things you can do, and the more capacity you have, the more complicated you can make the land expansion process. So with those words, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Julian. Cities Alliance has been with us along the way, and I'm especially happy that you did mention that one of the critical components, it's actually one of the 4 pillars of the urban expansion paradigm, is to protect environmentally risky land from development. And that's an essential part of that paradigm. I would now like to move quickly to our 5th panelist, Victor Vergara of the World Bank. Victor?
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess I should go faster because I'm the last one and I don't have to repeat many of the things that have been stated. Let me congratulate NYU for the work they've been doing over the years. I have had the pleasure of knowing Alan since I came to the bank in 1991, almost 30 years ago, and also met Solly there as a younger version of himself, and have worked with Alan, with Dave DeGroot as well in WBI. So I think there's a great team, and I think the inspiration that has been provided by has been very important in moving this forward. I want to address a few issues. One is the issue of the conventional wisdom of accepting the growth of cities through slums. I think that has ended. I mean, there is no conventional wisdom that it's great to grow through slums. That has ended. In the 2013 publication that the World Bank produced, Planning, Financing, and Connecting, I think it recognizes the fact that you have to plan first and finance second. The idea that you pour money into something and see what happens, I think it's no longer the case. And now the problem is, how do you translate that new wisdom of not accepting the growth of slums as the only way that cities grow into a reality? I want to also shift a little bit and introduce a new topic to the discussion, which is the role of why cities have grown the way they have, and also the role of automobiles in the growth of cities. I am right now, I'm in a house in the state of Maryland near Washington. And it's a very unique house. It's from 1923, and it's called a Chevy house. This house, mortgage for the house originally came with a car. So when you bought the house, you also bought a car because it was deemed to be too far away from Washington to get to jobs. So this Chevy house is emblematic of the problem of traditional planning, if you will, Western planning, where the solutions to mobility and access to employment has been individual transport. And it's kind of a unique privilege to live in the epicenter of the problem of how cities have been designed. And I think that this is a huge issue that needs to be brought into the discussion. The idea of incremental housing is also one that is, I think, widely accepted. It has not been internalized in the politics, in the policies of governments, and I think that is where a lot of the work needs to be had. Incremental housing, John Turner's freedom to build, all the work that was done on slum upgrading in Latin America in the 60s and 70s. I think there is a recognition that incremental housing is the way to go. And the way to go is also ensuring that there is land where this incremental housing can take place. Now, the approach of anticipating growth is fundamental. It is necessary if we're going to get urbanization right in the future. It is not clearly happening. There are, however, problems associated with this as has been presented. Very basic, in a very elementary way, there are two problems: the past and the future. We can't neglect what the core of the city that has already been built. We cannot wish it away. It needs to be nurtured. It needs to be cared for. There are many, many slums that need to be connected to the city because that's the way the cities have grown. That is the existing fabric. It's a broken fabric that needs to be fixed. And we also need to think about the future so that error does not take place in the future. So we have two problems. We can't not just one, and both have to be addressed. And the balance needs to be struck right. But I think for many of the cities that have already created themselves a problem, that it needs to be solved. And the last issue of capacity, I think the work that has been done in Ethiopia is I think, of great credit to the Ethiopian government because they recognize the need to build capacity early on. So 15 years ago, they took a very large loan from the World Bank to build the capacity of their planning entities. And I think that was a very, the foresight of ensuring that the capacity is there to take on these difficult challenges has been incredibly important. And then so I would emphasize the political will to recognize what we don't know and then to address, I think, is really fundamental. Last point, the issue of the road networks as the solution, I think is brilliant. The idea of the trees in Colombia, Soli, I think it's fantastic. Much better than stakes. Stakes are dead, trees are alive. I think that's a great innovation. We need another Norman Borlaug in the urban sector. We need incredibly powerful thinkers and doers to take on the challenge that is monumental and urgent. If we don't get it right in the next 10, 20, 30 years, it's over. We would have created monstrous cities that are dysfunctional. So thanks to everybody and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Victor. Before we open it for discussion, I'm going to ask Paul and Angela if they have any comments to make. I'll start with Angela.
Thank you. I really actually just want to make sure we have airtime for everybody. I think we're running out of time, and I'm looking at the dashboard and I'm noticing a long list of Q&A. I did love the comment of the living vision of trees on the streets, making sure we lay down those streets rather than stakes. I thought it was an outstanding comment. Just happy to hear from everybody, and thank you also for the Colombia experience to add to the Ethiopian experience. I think it really helps to make for a richer conversation. I'm going to hand over to Paul, and then I hope very quickly we can open it up for Q&A because we have a very active audience out there, and many of them have posed some outstandingly good questions. Paul?
Well, let me try and react to some of the things I've seen in the chat. First, when we talk about this arterial grid, it's easy to imagine that what we mean is roads with cars on it, but that is not what we mean. The arterial grid is the skeleton that allows connection. The value of cities comes from connections, and the grid is going to be important for every connection. That connection could take place over a wire, over a pipe, It could be fiber optic, it could be cable, it could be movement of goods on an electric vehicle, it could be a person walking, it could be a person on a bicycle, but all of the connection in a city, a person going from home to work, all of that connection will take place on this grid of, this arterial grid of surface area. So setting aside that land is not devoting it to cars and roads. Setting aside that land means keeping options open so that a government can shift to more bike lanes, shift to more bus lanes, shift to whatever is appropriate, lay the infrastructure, whatever is appropriate at any given point in time. There was also a question about how does this approach differ from, say, the planning that went into, Brasilia, for example, in Brazil. This is at the opposite extreme compared to Brasilia. Brasilia, smart people thought they could design everything. They could say even what the uniform should be like that the drivers should wear. And they made many, many mistakes because their ideas didn't match with reality. We're talking about the other extreme, which is that leave options open, and then as the city develops, you adapt and learn from what works, and you do more of that. So it couldn't be more different as an approach to planning from the approach behind Brasilia. Beyond that, let me just reinforce what Solly said, which is that this is not a silver bullet. This gives governments options if there is that arterial grid before people move in, but governments still have very important jobs to do. They're very hard jobs. They don't have enough data. They take administrative capacity and their resources are scarce. So we don't want to minimize at all the very hard work that has to follow on. But every job that the government will do will be easier. Everything they do will be more productive. Every dollar they spend will have a higher return if they have the options available to them from an arterial grid. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. I think that, Patrick, this is the time to open the discussion to questions from participants. So the panel is there. Why don't you provide us with a question?
My pleasure, Sally. Thanks to all the panelists. I'd just like to echo Angela's cognizance of time. So I think we can understand this as a lightning round, right? So we keep our answers to 30 seconds.
Although, Patrick, actually, let me make one suggestion. Could you put in the chat once more the link so that, because some people were asking, could they download and see this video again, because they had some bandwidth problems. So let's make sure everybody can get access to this video afterwards.
Great. Yeah, Juan, would you mind putting that link in the chat? So there's a number of good questions. I've grouped them into categories. A key question here has to do with how this affects tenure and compensation on the urban periphery. So the question would be, what can we do in situations where tenure is unclear, and how can we ensure that compensation is paid in a reasonable manner? So 30 to 45 second quick answers for a very complex question. And maybe we can start at the end of the line, so we can start with Victor and work our way back.
Patrick, I don't think we have time to work. I think that the person that would like to answer that should just kind of raise their hand.
Better.
And I'll direct the microphone to them.
Great.
Would anyone like to answer that question or to reflect on it?
Solly, if you want, I can say a few words on that.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an incredibly complex topic, and we see that in some cases, the cost of compensation is even greater than the cost of the infrastructure for the development, and that's where it becomes, it starts to become irrational. If there is no clarity on land tenure, it is extremely difficult, I would say impossible, to move forward. Land administration is a prerequisite. You need to have clarity on tenure, and if that is not present, it is very it is highly certain that you will have a conflict. So that experience that I mean professionally, maybe not speaking for the bank, but personally, I think that is a prerequisite. You need to have clarity. Thank you.
That's great. Next question comes from Habtamu Kebu. Informal settlement seems to be a big problem in Ethiopian urban areas. Comment on how this program helps in alleviating or minimizing informalities. Who would care to comment on that? Julian, great.
I think we have to balance two things here. The one issue is incremental housing that the poor build themselves, and informality. Informality means you're outside of the law. You're outside of the framing or of the planning framework. What this does is it enables people to settle on land that they know that government has said is the right land to settle, because it's not going to be used for future service lines. It's not going to be used, it's not going to be flooded by when the rains come. And if you settle this land, the risks of being removed are much lower. Now, at its very base, then, you are within the law. You are now settling land that government thinks you should be settling. If you have more capacity, you can then do some development control within that and plan that block. So I imagine that the grid creates blocks, and then within those blocks, different things can happen. And there's no reason why at the same level that you have a land expansion plan for the city, you can't have a simple plan for each one of those blocks to enable settlement to happen in a less informal way, but not fully formalized, because fully formalized then becomes too detailed, and you then start to get involved in backlogs and falling behind the curve again. So the difference is that you're not settling on the worst possible land, you're settling on the land that has been planned and made available for human settlement.
That's key. Nico?
Yeah, just want to make a quick remark on that point, probably to highlight again the possibility of replication on the matter. And I think Julian said it very clear in terms of the slums being symptomatic of a dysfunctional land and housing market. And let me just say something really quickly. Early this year, we were meeting here a major of a neighboring town from Bogota, the capital of Colombia. And the major at the beginning said, I've only received units of social housing or affordable housing on my town, and I have not received enough public space and enough public amenities, which is a fair point. However, there was such a large supply demand for housing and land for social or affordable housing on his town. It was obvious, and we told him, Mr. Major, it's not a good idea if you don't provide land and housing on the formal sector. You're going to be pushing people to the informal sector. 6 months later, and this was pre-pandemia. Now, 6 months later, after the pandemic, we met with the same major, and the major said, I want to tell you something. For the last 6 months, my biggest hurdle has not been the pandemic. My biggest problem has been trying to prevent informal and illegal settlements, precisely because of that. So one thing that we need to bear in mind, and this applies, I think is very universal, is the fact that if we keep a healthy land and housing market, we'll be giving people a chance to settle in better land, as Julian was saying. This is very important.
Nico, thank you very much. And I think that that's a really wonderful concluding comment as we come to the end of our time. Unfortunately, Dr. Romer had to leave for an appointment at 12:30. Sally, if it's okay with you, can I give a couple concluding words, or would you like to wrap up the panel? It's all right? Okay. So first, I'd like to thank you for facilitating this conversation. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for their great insights on this from many different disciplines. As a practitioner, I really appreciate how the panelists were able to focus the discussion on issues other than the purely technical aspects of planning. These often get lost, but I think that they're truly the key to aligning the political and economic resources that are necessary for this kind of a program to succeed. Unfortunately, we were able to recognize only a handful of audience questions, and I answered a few more in the chat, but we have 30 open questions, which is amazing. And many of them are really insightful, and all of them are really important. So I would just like to encourage everyone to get in touch with us after the event. And there are lots of other ways to get involved as well if you think that this work is important. For starters, we're always looking for opportunities to spread knowledge and information about this work. Please invite us to speak to your organization. We'll be happy to do it. We're also always looking for partnerships, people who can carry this work forward in different settings for different reasons. And we love supporting partnerships. Finally, we're always looking for funders. As Sally mentioned in the beginning, this very good work essentially only happened because Paul Romer had the latitude and the vision to put up the initial capital. And as has been said several times this afternoon, unfortunately, we can't all be Paul Romer, but we can all see the need for this kind of work to happen on the ground in many different countries, including continuing it in Ethiopia and beyond. So if you would like to support it, please reach out on this and on any other topics. We're always available and eager to talk. This brings us to the end of our program. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone who's participated. Angela Hawken, our panelists, especially Dr. Romer and Dr. Angel, for really bringing this work to light. The recording of the webinar will be available later today on our website and on our YouTube. And thanks everyone for attending, and I hope to hear from you soon.